70% of our economic activity is driven by the consumer. So is the consumer healthy? Will the consumer actually help us get out of this recession really quickly or avoid it altogether? Is the consumer healthy? I've got updated data on that and more coming up. My name's Mike Bernard. I'm the host of the Wise Money Show. I'm also one of the certified financial planners right here at Korhorn Financial Group. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and smash that thumbs up button. Everyone's on recession watch. Been making lots of videos about it, sharing perspective, helping you know where are we as an economy, and then applying that to your financial life. And I'll tell you, even though I do feel like the data is suggesting we may be in that recession already, gosh, if there's one reason why the recession maybe is shallow and not as awful as everyone is predicting, or gosh, if we skate by and avoid recession by the skin of our teeth, what would be driving that? Why could that be? How could that be? The consumer. The consumer, basically the consumer takes up 70%, makes up 70% of overall economic activity. That how the consumer goes really drives the economy. And the question is, so is the consumer healthy? Is the consumer struggling? Are they vulnerable? And fellow financial industry expert Ben Carlson came out and said, listen, is this the healthiest the consumer has ever been heading into a recession? And I think he's got a good point. I mean, first of all, if you're looking at whether the consumer is healthy and if they're prepared for a recession, one of the things I tell you every single time if we're talking about recession is make sure you're working on your budget and you're building up cash. Well, take a look at how much cash the average consumer has. They're sitting on a lot of cash, more cash or cash equivalents by U.S. households ever in history. And you can't say, well, it's because we've gotten such a good interest rate on cash. No, it's possible. Now you can see the trajectory of this change in 2020, possibly when they said, well, you can't go out and spend money. You can't go do anything. You can't travel. You can't do anything. So of course people are going to start building up cash. Then they hit the stimuluses and did some other tax benefits so that their tax refunds were a little bit bigger and so on. And of course all of this was part of them printing a whole bunch of money and injecting it into the economy. But the consumer is sitting on a lot of cash. They've got a big financial moat around their financial house in cash reserves. If we are heading into a recession, that is great news. And that could mean the recession is more shallow, not as deep as it could be. Second, debt servicing. Debt servicing, now that's kind of geek speak for what are your debt payments each month, but really how much of your monthly income is going towards paying debt. Meaning how much then is at your disposal to go out and go to the grocery store, go shopping, do the other things that you want to do. How much of your income have you already sort of spent and you have to use that amount of income to pay for debt? Now take a look at this chart. Extremely low number historically, just 9.5% of the typical person's income has to go towards debt. That's a very good and healthy number, especially when you compare it to where it was in 2007, right before the great financial crisis in 2008. It appears as though the U.S. consumer has more discretionary income, disposable income, than they had at the last recession. And then lastly, and I tell you, this one I'm going to be watching very closely. We'll talk about it here in just a second, but take a look at the amount of mortgage payment, debt service for your mortgage as a percentage of your disposable income. If you just look at how much of that overall debt service goes towards a mortgage, take a look at how low that is. 3.89% of someone's income is actually going towards their mortgage. Now, that is a far cry below where things were back in 2008 during the great financial crisis. So to me, this suggests, wow, the consumer is much healthier than they were at the last big recession. I know we saw a COVID crisis recession. That was the shortest recession we've ever had in history. So forgive me for not really counting that one in this analysis. But compared to the last big recession that we had, consumer a lot healthier. What about the recession before that, 2001? Consumers a lot healthier than that as well. So yes, I do. My personal thought is, and I can't see the future, but It does seem like we're already in that recession based on GDP Now data. We'll see in a couple weeks when it officially comes out. And based on this, I do think the consumer is more prepared than they've been in the past for a recession, and potentially healthier than they've been in the past as well. However, it's not all good news. There are some concerns that I have about the consumer and their ability to navigate through what could potentially be a challenging recession. The first is even though even though debt service as a percentage of income is better, take a look. I mean, there's a record level of credit card debt out there. It appears as though people have had this disposable income, and they've spent tomorrow's income today, and they're comfortable living with more credit card debt because they've looked around and said, well, I've got this disposable income. Let's spend it right now because I might, number one, I might not get the item that I'm buying for a few months. We had to buy a new dishwasher. Ours broke, and thankfully we were grateful to get one in 3 weeks. I know people have waited, a long time for appliances, and that's just one example. So people are more comfortable with credit card debt right now. We've got a record level of credit card debt. To me, that concerns me about the consumer. Second, we all know this, even though that mortgage payments as a percentage of income is very low, that's because interest rates have been so much lower. We know the trend of housing affordability has been frightening. Housing affordability has been frightening now with interest rates so high and the average house being much more expensive. Those folks buying new houses or moving, that is going to reset that overall housing payment as a percentage of your income. That's going to reset and really potentially could push things higher. And for certain consumers, really could be the thing that tips then, if we are going into recession, tips then from being able to navigate it well to being in a crisis because that housing affordability has gotten so poor. And then the last reason why I'm concerned about the consumer, at least moving forward, is a lot of the data has shown that, the consumer had all this disposable income, their savings rate skyrocketed, and then what we've seen just recently is that savings rate has absolutely plummeted. Why? Because either consumers have felt that discretionary income, so they've gone out and spent it, they've raised their lifestyle, or what I would say is a combination is raising lifestyle, making choices because, I feel like I've got the money, but then second, getting clobbered by inflation. We've all been dealing with inflation for 2 years now, okay? But we really haven't felt the effects until really just the past 6 to 9 months. I mean, it was something to squabble about early on, but now it's just everywhere you look, and that is eroding someone's purchasing power, someone's income, their disposable income, and could leave the consumer even more vulnerable if we do see a recession and therefore income loss, job loss. So on one hand, yes, I do think, based on the data, that the consumer is healthier today than they've been prior to previous recessions. At the same time, there are significant risks and threats. So to you, don't get overextended. A lot of this comes down to, you've hopefully seen your income, your wages go up recently over the past couple of years. Be very careful. Guard that margin. Guard that income as much as possible, as opposed to stepping up your lifestyle and making permanent decisions to lock you in, even if, so you're not nimble in case your income goes back down or your hours go back down, something like that. So guard your margin. I would do that by updating your budget. I would guard against this growing number, this record amount of credit card debt. I'd be paying that down as well, and I would guard that cash. If consumers have a record amount of cash, household cash on hand, I would guard that as much as possible. If we are going into recession, that's the time when you need that cash reserve, that buffer as well. Work with your certified financial planner on all of that. If you don't have a CFP on your team, you can contact one on my team. Find us online, Korhorn.com. That's Korhorn with K, wisemoneyshow.com. You can find us there as well, or send us an email, info@Korhorn.com. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.